Hi, I'm Corey, and today I'll be talking about my contributions to the Tavern Troubles project, starting with specific areas I worked on and then moving on to how I maintain an industry standard workflow and perform adequate game testing. Then, for the final and biggest section, I will explain how I created the builds for Tavern Troubles and go a bit more in depth about what I added/worked on and what order it was created in. Okay, let's just jump right on into it. So I created the NPC AI. Yeah, the final product is a bit glitchy, but what can I say? It's harder to code AI than you think. So, a little story. Jess presented Tavern Troubles in the first week of presentations before I got the chance to present my own game, and I immediately liked the idea, and I said to Jess on the walk out of uni that if her game got picked, I would create the AI, I would make them walk to the tables, I would make them order drinks, and I would make them leave. The AI I created can invariably perform all these functions, but they also can be a bit buggy, as they include a lot of separate systems developed by different people, but combined by me. So I created the first NPC prototype on the first week of the project. The NPCs could navigate to random chairs and then wait a bit, and then navigate to the exit. The problem with this implementation was that the NPCs could choose the same chair, a problem that would haunt me for a long time, until my suffering was replaced by a different problem, the NPC drift, but we'll get onto that a bit later. For now, all is peaceful in NPC land. I even developed this really neat activity system. They never got the animations to be properly implemented. The idea was that an NPC would walk into a bar and pick an activity, looking at painting, gambling, chatting, etc., as well as sitting down and drinking beer. This would, I thought, breathe life into the NPCs and could lead to giving them unique personalities. Oh, this person likes darts, this guy's a habitual gambler, drinker, etc. Anyway, to keep this section short, I will recount the story of one of the most prevalent bugs the NPCs had, choosing the same chair problem and its resultant performance optimizations. This performance data was taken with about 20 NPCs in the scene, and as we can see, do after seconds was being called like nearly 3,000 times per frame. So I implemented a check to only allow each NPC to run one of these functions at a time. So the problem of choosing the same chair was initially addressed by making the NPCs choose their chair from an array, remove it from the array, and then add it back to the array when they had done using it. Sounds simple? Didn't work. So I instead solved this problem by using this function here. I knew this function would become exponentially worse with more NPCs, so I scaled the scene up to have 50 NPCs, and yes, this became an absolute leech of a function. This is because the function works by checking every NPC against every other NPC to see if they have the same chair, and it does all of these calculations every single frame. So how to fix it? As a programmer, the most complicated solution struck me first, and that would be to upload this very CPU intensive function to a different CPU thread. So I dug up through some old forum multithreading posts, came up with this multithreading function, tested it with a print statement, everything looking good, so I copied my code over to the other thread, pressed play, and hey, it doesn't work. Apparently, you can't call find objects with tags from another thread. That's okay, I'll just make the list from the main function and then do the calculation in the other thread. No, you cannot do anything to do with the game scene from another thread using Unity. Limitation with the API I later learned. That was it. I was resigned to creating some sort of stupid shared tuple database or giving every chair its own script and social security number. Until one day, I was sitting, waiting for the bus, when an idea hit me. Why am I doing this? Not waiting for the bus. Calling every script, every frame. Surely there must be some sort of situation that happens every time two NPCs choose the same chair. Yeah, they bump into each other. Why not just check every time an NPC bumps into another NPC to see if they have the same chair and resolve conflicts like that? Alright, let's implement it. And wow, now look at that performance. Tavern data update has shrunk from about 250 milliseconds to 0.002 milliseconds. This was without drastically increasing the AI custom update function, which remains low at 0.1 milliseconds. And the do after seconds function has basically completely disappeared from over 100 milliseconds to practically zero. You can't even find it on the profile anymore. Okay, so there's two main UI elements that I created. That is the in-game menu, the upgrades, help screen, and settings, and the main menu that includes the credits, the sign, and a copied help screen. First off, I found some UI that I like the look of from other games using the Game UI database website. I posted these images on Discord, highlighting the parts that I thought we could take from them. Then I began to work on the UI. I used a color palette from flat colors to guide the UI color. Although at first I used the British color palette, I later changed my mind and used the much better Swedish color palette, which you can see influencing the final UI. I'll briefly cover the main menu and in-game menus here, but I also cover them later in the building the builds section. Let's start with the main menu. This had several iterations and was tricky to get right because of the world space UI, but I'm happy with the final product, which includes a help menu and a credits that scrolls. I created the animation for this and the sign swinging. The camera transitions animations were handled by Cinemachine. And next we have the in-game UI. Again, very tricky to get right. I ended up creating a UI heavily inspired by Bad North. These little upgrade icons on the background gradient I made in Illustrator. The fonts were sourced from DaFonts, and the scripts for changing tabs were from a Game Dev Guide YouTube video. The other scripts to buy items and change the settings were made by myself. Finally, I did some work on all the other UI elements in the game. I changed the font in the cutscene, I moved around these little UI panels just created, and I made this little clock animation. How cute! I updated the beer select and beer minigame UI panels to better reflect the scene. The beer minigame in particular was annoying as it was created as sprites in world space instead of using UI elements. As part of the work I did on sound design, I sourced several audio tracks for the game. Here's a sample of some of them. I then brought these tracks forward to the project manager and let them decide what theme the audio should go for, either a more indie/retro theme like the music from Celeste, or a more string instrument, almost western theme. The latter was chosen and the music I added can be found as the two main menu tracks and this background tavern song. Also in sound design I worked extensively on the NPC voice lines. To start with I wrote down a list of possible scenarios where an NPC might say a voice line. The two categories I came up with was when an NPC is served a drink and when an NPC is clicked on to view more information about that NPC. When I showed this to the project manager, she told me that the latter feature would not be added, so I decided to have voice lines if the player gets in the way or bumps into the NPC. Voice lines are also split into several categories. There are royal and peasant voice lines and rude and polite voice lines. The rude voice lines are meant to be played when an NPC has a low mood. This did not get implemented into the final build properly, as I'll discuss in a minute. Tuesday, the 30th of November is a date to remember, as the day I recorded all the voice lines. I prepared early, got my voice recorder ready. Oops, no battery. Okay, got my voice recorder ready, got my tablet to display the lines. Most of the lines were written by me, but a couple were written by Zach. I also brought in my laptop and headphones to do some audio work, but the recording the voice lines took so long that I was not able to. So with the lines recorded, it was time to create the script to make them work. The idea I came up with was to use a switch statement to find the voice lines of different people by finding the tags, and return those voice lines to be played by the NPC. This worked fine. What was tedious was sorting out all the voice lines in the correct folders. Let me speed that up for you. In the end, I only coded it to give random peasant line from either rude or polite for each person. This is mostly because the mood system was not integrated till late in development, and I did not have the time to go back and add the rest of the voice lines, so the majority of recorded lines are not in the final build. Here is some of the work I have done to keep my contributions to some sort of industry standard. I helped to create the meeting agenda to be used in team meetings. I did all of my work on GitHub, leaving relevant commit titles with my name in them and leaving descriptions for all my commits. This technique helps people see what has been created in a specific commit, useful for merging or rolling back commits. Following on with GitHub, I submitted my own pull and merge requests and got someone else to review them. Getting someone else to review your requests is important as they can double check to make sure you're not going to break anything. I created my code to follow the coding standards set out by my co-workers. To make sure I did not miss any of the coding standards, I submitted my own code for code reviews by my peers and made any of the relevant changes they recommended. The coding standard is especially helpful when someone else reads your code. I found it very helpful when reading other people's scripts that implemented the standard. I made sure to put relevant code comments in my code and make sure to name my variables suitably. Again, code readability is very important when you're handing your scripts to other people. At some points I did pair programming where I'd guide my co-workers through certain scripts I created or workflows I recommended. This was especially helpful when someone was looking at a script I created. I could tell them exactly what a function does. Although they could read the comments, I can better answer any questions that they might have had. I made use of messaging platforms, team meetings, and where possible, face-to-face conversations to voice my ideas, concerns, and contributions to the project. The latter was particularly important as I need to get team feedback in order to make changes to the items I was creating to make sure they fit the vision for the game. Finally, I made use of the Trello board in the beginning of the project. I added lots of cards for necessary game features like level design, player movement, AI customers, credits, main menu, and more, as well as more creative features like snail racing, cutscenes, and dynamic weather. I then joined in with the team in discussing and updating these features, and took care to update the cards I was working on with my current task progress. I performed sanity testing on all the game components I created or modified. I tested every feature created by someone else before I added it to the main game build. More on this in building the builds. I did performance testing using the Unity profiling tools on the AI I created and made the necessary changes. I created unit tests for the main game. These tests check if the game scene has all the required objects, tags, and other default settings such as tavern data, the player, the menu state act. I created these tests after accidentally submitting a build where the in-game menu was enabled by default, one of the things I now test for. It is easy to forget a data tag or some such, so running this test is very useful before building a build. Okay, now quick disclaimer before I get into this section. In building these builds, I did invariably touch up, balance, and even rework a lot of other people's code, and while I made changes and fixes to almost every aspect of the game, I have tried my best not to make this become my game, my ideal tavern sim. I add features that at first I do not think benefit the game, like the drinking minigame, but over time I've come to appreciate and enjoy these features, so I'm glad I was not in a position to remove them. So the first build was created about 4 weeks into the project. At this point I was unsure if there would ever be a game at the end of this, so I got to work on a Saturday and just started grabbing scripts and putting them together into one scene. I did this much like a caveman by loading the branch I wanted the script from and dragging the scripts and scenes from the Unity folder into my downloads, then switching back to the testing branch where I was making the build and copying the files back from the downloads to the Unity folder. I know, very smart. Later I would have evolved this method to use the Unity packages, great tip from Ali. So added to this build was the tavern design, the main menu, the AI customers, the camera movement, and the collecting and serving drinks mechanic. The integration testing for this build did not go very well as you could not deliver drinks to the NPCs, therefore breaking the core gameplay loop. I solved this by fixing two issues, first being that the customers needed to produce the right colliders and tags so that they could accept the drinks, and the second being a bug in the beer collecting script. The latter was an easy fix. It was using a game object tag instead of other.tag, a minor mistake, but the former required adding several lines to the beer collect script to inform the customer AI script that it had received a beer, and conversely on the AI customer I had to set it up so that a collider would spawn that would inform the beer collect of what beer the customer wanted. But as you can see from the gameplay, this worked out fine. That ugly looking beer menu was my mistake. I changed the colours from what James created, but I'll fix this later. Some more problems found during testing was that the main menu did not work, the play button covered the credits so I moved it down, the player movement was horrific and you could go through walls / walk out of the tavern. The team's reaction to this build on the following Tuesday was mixed. A sort of 5 weeks for this put it into perspective how much work was left for the game, although the game would not change drastically from this point, so at least this build was a solid foundation. Here is some footage from the second build. As you can see, it is much better than the first in terms of quality, as the main menu that I converted to the new scene and fixed to add the settings back in. It has the credits menu over the fire, but with a bug where you have to press to the right of the credits button or you'll go to the game scene. Speaking of the game scene, the player has animations now. I smartened up the beer collection menu, added in the on-screen UI. I had to add the coin counter and hook it up to the script that updates the player's coin. and also set up the drinks UI to show what drink is being held, and placeholder menu UI. Oh no, the colors are back. But most importantly, this build adds the first voice lines to NPCs. Here is a live nation reaction to finding out he is the only voice actor in the game.
Hang on, are they all just me?
Yes. Yes.
During the integration testing, I found that the player movement is reversed, so I had to change the values set in the script. This build was not played by many people, as it was superseded by the next build before an in-class session took place. I created this build just a few days after the previous build, and it features mostly UI work, better main menu, fixed all the bugs, and a new credit scroll that I created. In the main game scene, I made the menu UI a lot better and added settings with the option to change graphics and enable/disable full screen. This build still had some bugs. Most of the settings menu items like sound and reset player position did not work. The NPC is still T-posed, and you could still walk out the tavern. This build was very well received, coming out just over a week since the first build. Its numerous improvements and 4-minute voice acting made it seem far superior to that old work. This is the first build I put up as a beta release candidate, which shows how much work I put into it since the previous build. It features greatly improved main menu visuals. I mean, damn, just look at that gradient. The new help menu I created that I added to both the game scene and the main menu. It had the option to spend your gold on upgrades, new tables, changing colors, and a band. Each of these was a pain to implement and instantly failed the integration test. The new table upgrade I had to add the NPC chairs to the array so that they would be used. The changing colors just made them all pink. I had to change the reference for the materials from searching the asset folder to public material references. And for the band, I had to set it so you could turn it on and off, and it would stop the background music when it was playing. And finally, for all these upgrades, I had to set them up to be purchased and activated by buttons. Also added in the build are the NPC animations and mood system. The mood system I had to integrate into the beer collect script so that it would stop the NPC from losing mood if they got a beer on time. I also had to integrate it into the custom AI so that they would leave when they run out of mood. And this is where the problems really began during my integration testing. These systems, animation and mood, did not work very well. When an NPC leaves due to mood loss, they drift in the sitting position like Crazy Frog. Later I would find that they also do this drift when changing chairs or moving for any reason after their first sit down. I also removed some features in this build. Sabotage is gone, enemy taverns also gone, settings gutted, but these features aren't going to be finished, so I just took them out. But overall, this build was a massive improvement from the last one. One teeny problem, the NPCs did not respawn. This was found out by Jez. This is because when an NPC leaves due to mood loss, they do not put their seat back into the array for the other customers to use. So I did a few fixes, and ta-da, new build 1.1, during which I also took the liberty of testing all the known issues, as you can see here. This build adds the new cutscene, which I took from the cutscene branch, and added lighting and smoke particles too. I also changed the font for all the text objects to a more fitting one. Whilst we are on fonts, I also changed the ones used for the main menu. Now they look a lot nicer. I also added some new music to the menu and an Easter egg when you click on the duck. Next, I took the liberty of adding all the voice actors to the game, created and added a day-night cycle, added the table quality upgrades. This involved converting the table quality upgrade script to use arrays so that it could affect multiple tables, and again adding a buy button to replace the timer it was set to use by default. Then I went through the scripts and tried to fix some of the NPC drifting bugs. Some of it was fixed, but some of it still occurs. Then I built the game and did some testing with Jess. Turns out the NPCs face the wrong way on the tables. This is because of the new upgrade tables. So let's test the game a bit more and update the known issues. Wow, there's more than before. Still, progress is progress, am I right? I put the project manager back to the top of the credits. Don't know how it fell down to the bottom. Then I went into the game scene and rotated the chairs. I added some nav mesh cost to moving through the middle tables so NPCs will navigate around them. And I once again attempted to fix the NPC drifting problem. fixed the sign swing animation, fixed most of the NPC weirdness by making them go straight to standing instead of doing a stand-up animation, and combing through the script for logic errors. I fixed the player position reset. You have to disable the character controller if you want to move them. I didn't know this before. And I made the band quieter. Okay, the final build. For the final build, I helped Ali to fix some of the NPC problems using screen share. One problem I remember fixing was that some of the chairs on the chair list were null pointers. This was causing errors. Then I fixed the slot machine implementation before it would not pay out when you got 3 in a row. Finally, I guided Ali through the building process, what compression to use, etc. And then he created the build using his machine. In conclusion, I have worked extensively on almost every aspect of the Tavern Troubles games, and there are things I have made but not included in this video, either because I have forgotten it, or in order to save time. I very much enjoyed working on this project. That's all from me. Goodbye.